We got a bunch of Tenx events this weekend. Should you be pulling shards or not? That's actually what we're going to be talking about today. Welcome. I'm the Deadwood Jedi. This is another Raid Shadow Legends video, and we've got a bunch of different Tenx events this weekend. And so, I figured today would be a great time to look at the rates and chances of pulling champions for this and for other events that we have in this game. So this weekend we've got Duchess Lilitu, Rhodos, and Kymar. Those are all available, I think, today when you see this on Ancient Shards. That's for Friday. And then Saturday they're doing a 10x for Sacred Shards with Wither the Crown, Bad Alcazar, Mountain King, and then Sunday is the Voids. And this is the big one with Siphi the Lost Bride, Warlord, and Hegemon. I mean, those are some OP champions. So should you be pulling for those? Well, I've always said on 10x's, don't pull. It's not worth the rate. Only pull on 2x events. But we've had some changes a lot in the last few years, right? We've gotten guaranteed events where you're guaranteed to get a legendary after pulling a certain amount of shards. We've gotten double legendary events where if you pull a legendary, you're guaranteed to get a second one right then and there. So there's some other things that need to be factored in here when we're talking about when we should be pulling shards and what we should be doing. So this got me thinking, especially with this weekend, and I figured, hey, let me do a little bit of math, and I kind of whipped together this Google sheet, right? And so I tossed it up on my website. You'll see it under drop rates, under the guides and resources tab on my website. And I figured what I could do is I could show you guys, talk a little bit about what I came up with, kind of the things that I noticed from doing this. Now, my math is not spectacular. I'm not doing any super crazy calculus or anything. I just took very simple stuff, right? It took the percentage chance of pulling a shard and multiplied it by the number of shards I'm going to be pulling, that sort of thing. So it's very basic, and maybe there's some more complex mathematical equations that can give you a better insight on what you should be pulling. Also, I didn't really factor in your pity count, and that's going to make a big difference. Wherever your mercy counter is for your shards, that's definitely going to have a major impact on when you should be pulling and what events you should be pulling for. We'll talk about that right now, but I just want to make sure you understand none of that's really included in this sheet. This is a very basic guide of just showing you what the rates of getting certain champions are. So I figured what we can start with, there's three different things I think we should be talking about. We should be talking about 10x events, and we're going to save that till the end. We should also be talking about guaranteed shard events, and that's what we're going to be talking about next. And then in between, I want to take a moment and talk about those double legendary events. And this is going to be kind of my guidance on when you should be pulling shards, depending on where your account is, because that also makes a really big difference. Now, when we're talking about guaranteed shard events, this is where you have 150 ancients, and if you pull 150 and you don't pull that specific champion by then, you will then get that champion right after. We've had this for Wither the Crowned in the past. Same thing goes with sacred shards, right? 15 sacreds and 150 ancients. Those are usually the cutoffs. So we've had that for Wither the Crown. We just had it recently with Kyoku. I think we had it before with Lady Kimmy as well. And so these are generally really good champions, and I figure we should figure out, is it better to save our shards for those guaranteed events, or should we pull them on the 2x events? Because I've always said, pull for the 2x's, save your shards for the 2x's, but with these guaranteed events, it throws that equation out the window a little bit. So we need to kind of examine that. So, on the sheet, I broke down the basic rates of getting shards, right? So if we look at the ancients, right, out of 150 shards, on average, we're going to be pulling 3/4 of a legendary for the normal rates, right? For the normal 0.5% chance to pull a legendary rate. So, 3 times out of 4, we should have a legendary champion out of 150 shards. Okay. On those 2x events, it's double that rate, right? We're getting a 1% chance on every shard to pull a legendary. Out of 150 shards, on average, we should pull 1.5 legendaries. And on all the shard pulls I've done on stream and on video, those rates generally hold pretty true. And so then we go into the guaranteed shard event. And this means you're going to definitely get a guaranteed champion at 150 shards, right? So the floor of this is definitely higher than any of the other ones because you're guaranteed to get at least one champion, at least one legendary. And then on top of that, we still have that previous ratio from the normal rates of getting additional legendaries on top of that. So on average, we should pull 1 3/4 legendary for every 150 shards pulled. that's a slightly better rate than the 2x events. And so that's why I've been thinking, I think maybe I should start holding my shards for the guaranteed shard event. And if we look down at the sacreds, we can see a very similar kind of pattern. It's a little bit different because sacred shards are the 6% chance of pulling a legendary, right? And that doubles up to a 12% chance from each sacred on 2x events. So you can see out of 15 sacred shards, on average, we should pull almost one legendary, 0.9, right? Almost one legendary. So 9 out of 10 times we'll pull a legendary before we get to that, or on that 15th shard. So before that point, we should be able to get that legendary. On the 2x event, it's a 1.8 chance, right? Double that ratio. So on general, in 15 shards, we'd pull about 2 legendary champions. And with the guaranteed event on 15 sacreds, that also is about 2. Now it's 1.9, just a little bit higher than that 1.8 from the 2x event. So I think you can see overall, always, the guaranteed events, if you have enough shards, will almost always net you more legendaries. Now, it's not guaranteed. Everything's RNG in this game, right? Except for those guaranteed events, you're guaranteed to get that one. So on average, though, you should be able to get more legendaries by pulling on guaranteed events than you would on 2x events. There's a big caveat, though, and I think this is really, really important, especially when it comes to the ancient shards. Not so much with the sacreds. I think with the sacreds, you're definitely better saving for the guaranteed events, no matter the level of your account. But with the ancient shards, there is a caveat, and I think this is important to remember, is that on 2x events, you're not only double the chance of getting a legendary champion, but also double the chance of getting an epic champion. So if you are a new player, an early game player, even like a mid-game player who, maybe just doesn't have a ton of champions on your account, you're probably going to be better off actually pulling on the 2x events because those epic champions are much more likely to pop for you. And so until you start getting into the end game where you have almost every epic champion, which is the case I'm at, up until that point, you're probably still better off pulling on 2x events because those epic champions can have just as big an impact as any of those legendaries you pull. I mean, this doesn't even take into account the fact that, you still need the books for the legendaries, just like you do the epics, and epic books are a lot easier to come by. So I would say if you are an early game, mid game, even late game, if you just don't have a lot of epic champions, the 2x events are still going to be your better bet. The difference between that and the guaranteed event is not that great. But the guaranteed event is definitely something that's going to be better for end game players, late game players that already have almost all, if not all, the epic champions out there. And I thought that was interesting, right? I needed that kind of visual, that mathematical confirmation of something I had been thinking about. And if we think about the sacreds, the thing is, even if you don't pull a legendary with the sacreds, you're still getting an epic champion. So that doesn't really hold true there. In that, I would still want the better chance of pulling those legendary shards, which is those guaranteed events, because those guaranteed champions have always been good champions, right? And that's another big part of it. Do you want just any old champion, or do you want an OP champion, right? And those guaranteed events definitely lend themselves to getting you one of those OP champions. Now, there is one caveat. If you are an early game player, you might just be better off having better champions early than waiting for a guaranteed event to come by. So that is definitely something you're going to want to kind of consider when you're thinking about, should I save all these shards or should I go ahead and pull them now? Once you're able to take down things like Ultra Nightmare Clan Boss consistently every week, you're able to accumulate enough shards where holding on to or having 15 sacreds isn't that huge of a thing. But in the early game, that's obviously not the case, even for a lot of people in the mid game. And so oftentimes getting that legendary champion will make a bigger difference on your count right away. And the difference in rate is not that high, 1.8 versus 1.9. It's not that big of a difference to justify holding on to your shards a super long time. So I think that's a really good thing to know, right? Guaranteed events, definitely good for end game players. The 2x is still really the better way to go for early and mid game players. So now let's talk about those double legendary events. The one where when you pull one legendary, you're going to get a second legendary with it. These, we have to remember, are just on the base ratios, right? They're not crazy 2x events, right? They're not going to give you a guaranteed legendary. It's only if you pull one that you get another one. And so if you're somebody that can save up enough shards, you're in the end game or something, I think this is equivalent to a guaranteed event, right? Makes sense, right? If I have, 150, 200 shards in the bank, or my pity is really high, it makes a lot of sense for me to go ahead and pull on this, because I can go ahead and pretty much guarantee that I'm going to get this legendary champion, right? If you don't mind spending money, okay, I didn't get there, but I can spend a little bit more and get there. Boy, has that happened to me before. And that's actually a good point to bring up, is it's a lesson why, if you're an early game, mid game player, I don't think these are events you really want to go for unless your pity counter is high. If your pity counter is about to pop and you have enough shards to guarantee you're going to get that champion, then it's absolutely worth it, right? Whenever you can get a bonus legendary, that's always going to be a good thing. I think it also makes more sense if it coincides with a 10x event for champions that you are interested in. Then the chance of not only pulling a legendary, but one that's going to help your account becomes higher. And this actually kind of lends me a little bit into this. One of the things I have on the sheet here is OP Legos. Now, I basically listed 15 Legos that I would consider OP for ancient shards or sacred shards, right? Because those kind of come from the same pool. And 10 different OP Legos I would consider OP for void shards. And it's important to understand how many champions are going to make a difference for your account. And you can quibble about which ones I pulled out here and singled out, but the idea is that there's a smaller pool of champions that are actually going to be helpful for you. We're excluding the Jingwans of the world. We're excluding the Tilas of the world, because understanding that if I pull those champions, they're not really helping my account. What I want are those OP legendaries, right? The ones that are going to take my account to that next level. And so understanding that really helps us to understand when we should be pulling for 2 times or 10 times event, and also when we should be pulling for those guaranteed events, right? If it's not a legendary champion that we want or need, there's really no advantage to doing that. I'd rather pull on a 2x event, right? If it's not for these double events, if it's not an OP legendary champion that I feel like I need on my account, again, there's no reason to pull for that. So understanding that is important. And then, of course, we come to the 10x events, and this is really where I think it gets a little bit more confusing. At least it was for me. I didn't realize how important it is to be pulling on 10x events, especially during void shards. And this is kind of a random thing. Now, if you're an early or mid-game player, 100% you should be avoiding 10x events. It's not worth the rate unless you're at the pity. If you're at Mercy, if you're about to pull a legendary regardless, then of course a 10x event is really good, especially the more 10x champions that are involved, and assuming that they're all OP champions. So if we think about this weekend, where we have on Sunday, we have Siphi, we have Siphi, Warlord, and Hegemon, right? 3 OP legendaries. These are the kind of champions where you can have multiples of them and nobody's upset, right? Those are unbelievably good. And so by adding more of of those champions to the pool of champions, it becomes a lot easier to pull them. For Void legendaries, there's only 36 out there that we can pull from Void shards, right? Doesn't include Doom Tower, doesn't include champions like Lydia or Ramantu. So out of those 36, I say about 10 are OP. You can quibble on the number, but the idea is that there's a pool that is useful for me out of that group, right? So for me, there's about 27.8, right? 10 out of 36, 28% of them are Legos that I want. So maybe a quarter of the time, a little bit more than that, when I pull a legendary shard from a void shard, it's going to be an OP legendary, somebody that's really going to help my account. With a 10x event involved, even if it's just one champion, that number, the chance of me pulling a legendary that's going to help my account, jumps from 28% to 42%. Now, this isn't the chance to pull that champion. This is just the chance that that champion is going to be beneficial to me. This is why for 10x events, keeping track of your mercy, keeping track of your pity counter is really helpful, because all of a sudden these 10x events become so much more useful for you. There's no point in me pulling trash legendary, like Baron, for example. He's not trash, but he's not great, Why would I want that when instead I could get a Kymar? And the chance of me pulling somebody really good like Kymar jumps up a lot as long as he's in a 10x event, right? So if I'm coming up on the Mercy, that becomes a really good time for me to pull shards. And that jumps to a 52% chance when there's 2 champions in that 10x. And like we have this weekend where there's 3, that jumps up to a 59% chance almost. So most times, 6 times out of 10, I'm going to be pulling one of those legendary champions that I want on my account instead of just another champion that I'm not going to use and put in the vault. Makes a really big difference, right? And so that's something that I hadn't really thought about. Now, that's, if I include those OP champions. Now, if I don't include the OP champions, I'm just talking about those specific 10x champions, you can see that number is up there as well. 22% chance for a specific legendary and void, 37% chance that there's two 10x champions, and like this weekend, a 47.5% chance of getting one of those 3 specific 10x champions. So the more champions that are good in those 10x's, the better. This weekend, actually, with the Ancients and the Sacreds, you have a similar situation. It's not as good because there's so many more champions in the pool there, right? We have 100 right now, at present, 114 Ancient Legendaries, or Legendaries that can be pulled from Ancient Shards, and 111 Sacred Shards, or 111 Legendaries that can be pulled from Sacred Shards. It's a little bit lower because you can't pull the daily login chance from Sacred Shards, right? So it's not a ton there, and I've only, really keyed on 15 champions in those pools that are OP anyway. Honestly, for many of you, it might not even be that high. But you can see, to get a specific Lego on a 10x from an Ancient Shard, it's only 8% chance. It's not super high. 15% chance that there's 2 of them, and like this weekend, it's only a 21% chance. So you really only have like a 1 in 5 chance of actually getting one of those champions. Even for this one here with Duchess, Rhodos, and Prince Kymar, all OP champions, there's only a 1 in 5 chance of actually pulling them. So unless you're at mercy, and even if you are, just understand the chance of still getting one of those champions is still relatively low because there's so many champions in that legendary champion pool. It definitely goes up when we pull the OP champions into the mix, but it's only going to increase by a little bit there. So it's not going to make a huge difference. Now, when we're talking Sacred Shards, the ratios don't change that much. It goes up a little bit because there's a few less champions that are available there, but really it's about the same chance to pull one of these OP legendaries. This weekend's going to be about 30% chance to get one of those three champions with your Battle Khazar or Mountain King from Sacred Shards, and I don't even consider them all OP champions. So obviously the earlier game you are, the better chance that when you pull something, it's going to be good for your account. And so maybe you factor that into your 10x, rates and what you want to pull. But for me, I think these are pretty reasonable. The champions I kind of honed in on, I figured were the ones that were going to change most people's accounts, or you wouldn't be upset if you got a dupe of. And not everybody fits that category in here. But for me, I thought this was a pretty decent number and gave us a good guide as far as the rates that are out there that we can use. So I don't know. If you guys want to pull legendary champions on these 10x events, obviously you got to do what you want to do. But if you want to be smart and maximize the value out of your shards, I would start saving your shards for end game, late game players. Start saving your ancient shards. Start saving your sacred shards for the guaranteed shard events, or at least for the double champion events, right? And pulling on the 10x really only has a lot of value for void shards when you're close to pity. It's still worth it to pull on the 2x's for voids, I think, especially for early and mid game players. Man, those 2x events get you so many more epic champions, and that's so valuable. But if you aren't at that point, if you're past that point, if you're in the late or end game stage, you're going to get a lot of benefit waiting for those 10x events. And, as soon as your mercies count gets high enough, and at that point pulling your shards, because the legendaries you do get are going to be super valuable to your account. And there's a much higher likelihood of that in any case. So to me, I thought this was really interesting, and it was nice to be able to see visually what I've kind of been thinking internally, but I hadn't just seen it anywhere. Now, I'm sure there are other, sheets and, breakdowns of this out there floating amongst the community, but I found this helpful. So I did swap, just throw this on my website. If you guys want to check it out, maybe it can be helpful for you. You can quibble with it all you want. That's okay. I don't really mind. It's not, there's nothing proprietary here. These are just my opinions, and I think this is a solid guide for you to kind of figure out, when you want to pull and when you don't. So hopefully this is helpful for you guys this weekend. I wish you the best of luck in your shard pulls. We've got a bunch of events going on. We got the Forge Pass. We've got the Fusion event. So for those of you pulling, I wish you a lot of luck. And until next we meet, I'm the Deadwood Jedi.